Welcome to the Tax Professionals Podcast, the podcast dedicated to helping you improve your tax career. Here's your host, Jack Bonehill.
Studying towards the ATT and CTA exams can be a stressful time. All the effort of studying and revising before exam day itself, or so you can pass and become qualified. The journey towards qualifying can be tough and long, but by taking a sensible approach, you can increase the chances of passing each exam and take much of the stress and uncertainty away. In this episode, Nitin Rabheru joins me for a second time on the podcast to give you tips and advice on how to prepare for the 2021 exams to maximise your chances of being successful. The last episode with Nitin, episode 5, got loads of great feedback from students, so it's great to have Nitin back. But for those of you that don't know Nitin, he's been lecturing tax students for over 21 years. He's extremely passionate about helping you and every other student to be successful with the exams, and he's an all-round great guy. The May 2021 exams will be online and open book for a second time, so this episode supplements the previous episode with Nitin. This is because a lot of Nitin's advice and tips remain the same as before, so there's no need to repeat them here. However, based on the experiences of the November exams, Nitin has some new advice to take note of, which is provided in this episode. I can highly recommend you listen to episode 5 of the podcast too, after this one, so that you don't miss out on any of Nitin's great tips. Just before we jump into the episode, I have worked with Nitin to create a step-by-step guide to creating your very own revision folder. Don't worry if you don't know what this is yet, it is covered in this episode. All you need to know at this point is that Nitin suggests that every student has one. You can download the guide and find a link to episode 5 in the show notes at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP19. That's thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP19, and TTPP19 just stands for the Tax Professionals Podcast Episode 19. I remind you about this at the end of the episode, so no need to write this down now. So thanks for joining me today.
Anyway, on the
without
podcast,
further ado,
for the second
let's get
time.
straight into
glad you decided
Nitin's
to come
advice.
back on, because it was a really popular episode last time. Actually, the most popular one I've had to date, which is obviously really good. People found it very useful. So I'm really happy that you decided to come back on again and help some more ATT, CIOT students.
Yeah, Jack, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm actually glad to be back. I think for round 2. So no, I was actually really surprised at the amount of messages that I received from students that found it really, really useful. So thank you so much to you for kind of organising it, doing all the hard work in putting it together. So I'm hoping that anyone listening to this second podcast find it equally useful.
Yeah, let's hope so. So it's like round 2, isn't it? Let's hope we live up to expectations this time then. Maybe we've set the bar too high. Just for people then who didn't listen to the first episode or might not know who you are, could you just, I suppose, tell us a little bit about how you help ATT and CIOT students?
So firstly, I'm a tutor at BPP full-time, and all my teaching is done via BPP, but I'm really fortunate that my bosses at BPP also allow me to kind of spread the message, really, spread the word in helping non-BPP students, any student really, that is sitting an ATT or CTA exam and just wants a little bit of impartial guidance, a little bit of help, a bit of a nudge to get them on track. And that's what I love. I love helping people pass exams, getting through, especially tax exams. And I would love to say it's a passion of mine. So yeah, that's what I do. I just want anyone listening, just want to get you through.
Yeah, I think it's a really lovely thing to be passionate about, because I'm sure so many people find all your advice and help useful, particularly on LinkedIn. So yeah, it's all good stuff there. So just to give a bit of a summary then for this episode. So what me and Nick plan to go through today is to kind of, I suppose the main aim is to give you the best chances of passing the May 2021 exams. So we're going to let you know about what to expect in the May sitting in terms of what that's going to be like. So Nick will correct me if I'm wrong here, I'm sure, but I believe that is going to be online again and also open book, like with the November 2020 sittings.
Absolutely.
So I'm sure you've learned a lot from that, Nick, and we can give people some advice from what you've learned from the experience, I suppose, of that first time round. We will give a little recap on how you can go about preparing for the exam. So that's both kind of the study phase and the revision stage. And then I suppose just any other great advice that I'm sure Nick will give throughout the episode as well. So hopefully you'll all find that useful. So if you're ready for it, then Nick, we can jump straight into the into the
Go for it.
questions?
Yeah, please do, Jack. Go for it.
So we've already touched upon it then, but are these sittings going to be any different then to the November 2021s? I suppose in terms of, is it going to be online, open book, etc.? How is that all going to work this time?
Yeah, so basically, it'll be the same format as far as I'm aware. There hasn't been any announcement to the contrary, but everything's going to be online. It's going to be an open book exam. From my experience, with my students, it seemed to be a really, really smooth procedure. No one really struggled or had issues or problems. So yeah, I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that it goes smoothly again in May. So yeah, the system that the ATT and the CIOT kind of switched to for November was fantastic, and credit to them for doing that as well.
Yeah, good on that. And so is it still open book in the same way as it was last time, and you can take in literally any material that you want?
I get asked this a lot. You can take in whatever you want. Whatever you want. It does not matter. And any resources that you feel that will assist you in that exam, you can take.
It's almost quite overwhelming, I think, for students, isn't it, that because you literally can take whatever you want in. So where do you even start, I suppose, in deciding what you do take in? I know last time we spoke, you kind of talked about using a revision folder. Yep. We can come on to that in a bit later because I think it'll fit better in the episode later on. But yeah, I'm sure that's going to still be the recommendation to people. So obviously this is the second time round then of online and open book for the tax exams. I imagine you and others at BPP have gotten a lot of insight from students who did the last sitting. So how did students find the exams, generally speaking? Did they have any positive, any negative feedback? How's that all been?
Yeah, I mean, the majority were okay. They were fine. I did have, you're always going to get, and they're right, that there were a handful of students who kind of felt they didn't enjoy the experience of the open book, in that because I think it was computer based, that they felt that their typing speed was not as fast as their writing speed. Okay, and that's difficult. That's difficult in that situation. It's about the student just practicing. And for one student, I actually said, I said, look, this was in the summer. I said, look, you've got enough time to even go on a touch typing course, to kind of just speed up your typing. And to her, I thought she'd ignore my advice. And she came back to me about a month before the exam and said it really helped. Okay, it actually helped her speed up on the typing, and it was COVID, it was a pandemic. So, she's at home. I thought, let me give it a shot. So I think for a handful of students, I think it can be a little bit problematic. I think a lot of students also, because it was, generally in class, students like to annotate on the question. And that's probably the biggest complaint from ACA students and and tax students, that look, I really want a piece of paper. But I found, because I teach a lot of ICAW business planning tax, that once you get the technique, you actually don't miss that piece of paper, and it's about switching over. Yeah, it's about switching over to a different style. And I generally found most students got used to it. I know we're going to talk about revision separately, but I think the whole annotating the piece of paper, a lot of practice was done during revision to help them just annotate on the screen, or just kind of not even annotate on the screen, just kind of spot key issues. So even though you didn't have the question paper, if you just have a blank sheet of paper and spot key issues, that works just as well. So that was an issue. And I think generally I think for those students who prepared from the beginning a revision folder, they found it a lot easier. And there were a lot of students from BPP and non-BPP students who kind of still didn't understand this concept of the folder and what goes, like you rightly said, what goes in the folder. And so I think this is where this podcast, we can spend a bit more detail just giving specific guidance on, look, what should go in and what should not go in.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I know at least one person who didn't have a revision folder. They just took in the study manuals. And I know they ran out of time before even completing the two last CTA questions. So that's obviously pretty damning, really, isn't it, I suppose, in the context of that exam?
The study manuals are brilliant. And the thing is, I don't want anyone listening to this podcast thinking, oh, the study manuals are awful. The study manuals are amazing, and you can use them. They can form part of your resource. But if you're going to start using the study manual, then you've got to use tabbing. You've got to tab the manual. You've got to have things already highlighted, already annotated. So you can. Please don't think that you can't. You can. If that's what works for you, then you've just got to, find some kind of efficiencies here, economies of scale, efficiencies to help you just get on point, so you're not time wasting.
Yeah, I think that's the problem that the person I knew had is they didn't do all those things. So then they were just literally going straight back to the contents page. I suppose it's pretty much trying to use the legislation. It's the same thing, isn't it? It can be time consuming if you don't know where things already are.
Absolutely. And I think I know we're going to repeat this, but I would say the sooner you start getting your folder ready, and the sooner you start using your folder in your mock exams, your course exams, and during revision, then you will find that exam relatively straightforward. And that's the key. Start now. Start from today.
Yeah, fair enough. And just so I understand as well, by the way, so obviously you mentioned about people annotating questions, because that was something I used to do, probably overboard a bit. So is your suggestion now to just basically, instead of annotating, pull out the key points on a blank sheet of paper and then use that as the basis to answer the question? Absolutely.
100%. That is, we are where we are in 2021. This is the best we're going to get. And I think this skill of just looking at the question on the computer screen and just picking out the key points, people need to start developing that from now.
Yeah, makes sense.
And that's something that I factor into my talk course from day one. Is literally, I'm very much about the exam.
Yeah.
This is it.
So, may have touched upon this a little bit already, but what do you think people actually found the most difficult then about the November 2020 sittings? So were there any common trends that students found difficult, any common downfalls? And is there anything that you think students can do to avoid that this time round?
Yeah, I think, yes. I think the first problem, I think there are a number of students that kind of do this analysis of what questions came up previously. Yeah. And so, especially with the owner managed business advanced technical paper, I think annual maxima got tested again, and it got tested prior to that. And so students were like, oh, it came up before, so I didn't revise it. Well, that's not how you prepare for these exams. Yeah, those students who are analysing past papers and using some kind of artificial intelligence software to work out what's happening next. Look, don't sit the exam. Just this is not about that. That's the wrong approach. You need, when you go into a tax exam, you have to expect everything. And so I found a lot of students that was one issue. The second problem, I think a lot of the students in owner managed businesses found, and there was the commentary that I found, was that they found the questions a lot difficult. And I've seen the paper. I felt it was a very fair exam. Okay, and I'm going to be doing a separate recording break once it's been released, showing students how to spot the key issues. And I think the main problem with the owner managed business paper, a lot of students were not prepared on this scenario based learning, Jack. So what they've done, they've looked at all the past papers thinking that's it, something similar will come up, and think there was repetition of scenarios, but students just couldn't identify them. Yeah. And I think so the way that students are attempting questions, I think, is still wrong. If anyone's seen my recordings, my sessions that I've done with the CIOT and other bits and bobs, it's about reading it line by line. Anyone listening here needs to learn that if you're going to do a tax exam, ultimately it's about you finding solutions to tax problems. You've got to identify the problem. And and that's the most difficult thing to do in the exam. Once you've identified the problem, that's it. You've passed. So and again with the taxation of major corporates paper, something very, very similar. So the students that I've spoken to, and it's interesting because after the exam, you will speak to a range of students. You'll speak to the students that found it really straightforward because they were organised, they've done the work, and then you find the students at the other end of the spectrum that literally said, "Oh, that was the most difficult exam ever." So you get conflicting feedback as well. Yeah.
I suppose almost no different to a usual exam then, being online or open book or not, because you always get the both ends, don't you? But
Yeah,
go on,
yeah.
sorry.
Sorry, Jack. Sorry, jumping in. And one of the key things they, as you just mentioned it, with the open book, you know, I think a lot of them were surprised how time pressured it still was.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of them. So there were many students who thought I could just copy out sections and chunks, found themselves running out of time.
Yeah.
And this is what we'd said in the last podcast, that an open book exam does not make it easier. Okay, the ATT exams, the CTA exams are still tough. They're still challenging. But your prep needs to be ready. You've got to be ready to apply your knowledge. And I think I can imagine quite a few students took their foot off the pedal here and thought, oh, I can just copy things out. And so I think it backfired for quite a few people, I can imagine.
Yeah, and that all makes sense. I mean, was there some people then that I suppose didn't learn enough of the material off by heart because, yes, it's open book, but I suppose the revision folder that you talk about is there more as a prompt, really, isn't it, than to tell you everything that you need to know about something?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so don't be one of those students.
Yeah.
Still put the work in. But you have touched upon two of my biggest pet peeves when it comes to studying for exams, and that's analysis of old questions. And if I would have done that, I think I would have failed probably one or two of my CTA exams. I remember specifically in my human capital advisory paper, which it was at the time when I did it, it had a question around, I think it was maternity pay and paternity pay. And that had not come up in any exam before, and I imagine a lot of students didn't even prepare for that. And so, if I didn't know that, that would have been the difference between me passing and failing that exam, I think. So it just goes to show, doesn't it?
And I think that my frustration is, with students is they're trying to predict. They're trying to predict what's coming up. You devalue the qualification. This is the gold standard. This is an inroad to becoming a professional tax advisor. And I think a lot of students need to kind of step up to that.
Yeah.
That these are not tough exams. These are exams that are going to bring out the best in you.
Yeah.
As an advisor, and so I think a lot of students, especially that have done other qualifications, and I've had it so many times where ACA students and ACCA students will say to me, but in my other qualifications, I've just practiced all the past paper questions, and that's fine. But this CTA and ATT, it's a different beast.
Yeah,
it's a different level, and I think people don't respect that sometimes.
Yeah, I can completely agree. I mean, I know this is a stupid scenario, but could you imagine having a circumstance on the job where you basically, I don't know that because it didn't crop up in a past CTA paper? I mean, it would just be ludicrous, wouldn't it?
100%. Yeah.
This is not just about passing the exam, really. I know that's obviously important, but to me, it's all about setting yourself up for your career, which is going to probably span 30, 40 years. So, yeah, completely agree with you. It's not about analysis of old questions. It's about understanding all the material, isn't it, to be able to answer the questions.
You're right. And when I teach tax, so this year I'm teaching ATT paper 4. I don't get paper 4 ATT that often, so I'm quite giddy with excitement. But no, seriously, I'm so excited. I'm doing ATT paper 4, and so all my Christmases have come at once, and whether it's ATT paper 4 or a CTA paper, I will always start with, let's look for problems. And I think that's the key thing. When anyone's starting their CTA studies, forget the theory, forget the knowledge. Yeah, that's 20% of what you've got to do. The main bit is look at the tax impact. Why are you learning that? What's the outcome? What's the tax impact? And the minute you start thinking along tax impact, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? You're en route to passing. And I think a lot of students don't get past that. They're stuck in the manual. They're stuck in the theory. And that's the problem.
Yeah. I agree. So before we both end up ranting again about some of these points, I imagine people did struggle a bit with the software, not just because of, I suppose, typing speed, but maybe because doing tables or similar things like that is more difficult. So is there any way that people can become more familiar with that so that they're familiar with it for the exam?
Yeah, so credit to the CIOT in that they made it available that there's a lot of support on the CIOT, the ATT website with the software. The main criticism I think students had, well, not criticism, the question was, we're going to struggle to do tables. Okay. And I said to students, okay, that's fine. If you're struggling, because the way the software works, it can be a little bit difficult to do tables unless, after this podcast, there's been more enhancements to the software, then fine. But it wasn't a deal breaker. All I said to the student was, well, look, for example, if you're doing a capital allowances column, where generally we would have one table with the AIA column, the main pool, the special rate pool, and I said just do it individually. Literally, just do one column at a time, and most of the students were happy with that. Mm-hmm. I said, and I said, that's fine. It may not look nice, but at least you're going to get your marks. So yeah, they were happy with that.
Yeah, well, that's definitely one for people to take away then, because I imagine doing like a 4-table column in that software is going to be tough. So splitting it out is going to make it easier, isn't it?
And I do strongly recommend that once you finish the taught phase and you're comfortable with your content of your relevant paper, just practice a little bit on the software, and then you'll be absolutely fine.
Perfect. So just before we kind of jump into, I suppose, how to approach the study and revision phases, then have you got any kind of key advice then, based on what we just talked about, for people who will be sitting this this year, based on the experiences from the November 2020 ones? Is there any key points that really do stand out for you that you really want to hit home with students?
Yeah, I think the first thing is get a folder. Get dividers from 1 to 30, and with a pencil, not with a pen, just temporarily mark out what's going in each folder, each divider. Okay, so and I think, and what you want to put into the folder, hopefully your tutors will guide you. Okay, but ultimately it's going to be core bits of information, okay, that you can then use to apply in the real exam. For example, if you're doing income tax ATT paper 1, you may want to put in the income tax pro forma, okay, the capital gains tax pro forma. If you're doing ATT paper 4, the corporation tax paper, okay, then there'll be lots of pro formas for R&D relief, this corporation tax comp. And so I think that's really, really important that you start putting in content that can help you. What I don't recommend is where people put in reams and reams of information, because you're then going to struggle to find it. So in the exam, I generally say to my students, you've got 10 seconds, between 10 and 60 seconds to find that information. Then the other key part, what students found, was that you also want to have model answers ready to scenarios. Okay, not that you cut and paste and you copy out, but you apply. So for example, if I could just quickly cite this as an example, we've got business asset disposal relief, which replaces the old entrepreneurs relief. Okay, for a shareholder, we know the conditions. Okay, it's 5% minimum, 24 months, trading company working. And I think if you just put that in to your divider, but then you have the skill to apply it to the scenario, then think about the tax impact, it's 10%. Think about the timing for the claim and election. Are you going to recommend it? So that kind of information will then help you with any question that you have. And the final thing I think is fundamental, we talked about this last time, was the watch outs. Okay, so what the watch outs that I recommend are that during the taught and revision phase, when you do questions and you make a mistake, and it's a mistake on business asset disposal relief or any particular thing, put it at the front of each of your sections. So that will then speed you up in the exam. It will sharpen you technically, and that's a really good thing. So and it's regular revision. There is this debate, Jack, where some tutors are saying that even though it's open book, you should still learn the content. Okay. Whereas I'm saying no, I don't think you need to learn the content to revise or memorize the content. I think it's really important you understand the concepts and the content and let the folder do the work. With an open book exam, it's no longer about a memory test. Okay, it's more about the application to the scenario. Okay, so the more, all the good content you can put into your revision folder, then you let your folder do that work. okay, where you can go to it and apply it. And that's my personal opinion. I know there are some tutors who are strongly saying, no, you should learn it, you should revise it. I think the student should make that call as to what works for them. I try and encourage my students not to waste time revising.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I suppose in my words, it's really like understand the material, but you don't need to remember all of it. And then by the sounds of it, and this might be a slight oversimplification, so apologies if that is the case, but the revision folder is literally there to act as a prompt, is to remind you in the exam of the wider picture.
Absolutely. And that's what you want. And I think there are too many. That's why, and you can use the study manual as a prompt, Jack. If those students that love the study manual, and it is amazing, I have to say that. Okay, but just manage your time in what you're writing. You've got the memory joggers. There are the memory joggers that are fantastic. I will be uploading for free sample summaries. Okay, for OMB Advanced Technical and APS and Taxation Major Corporates, just to show students, look, this is my suggestion on how you construct your revision, and you do what's best for you. You've got there is so much amazing resource, Jack, out there, and I think quite a few students are confused. Do I use the study manual? Do I use the NITS revision summaries? Do I use the memory joggers? What it comes down to is what works best for the student. Mm-hmm. Okay, and that's the thing, and that's where sometimes you might need to speak to your own tutors. They can direct message me via LinkedIn, but they've got to find a system that works for them effectively, ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, just on that then, because I'm sure it's a question I would have if I was doing this then. So how do you suggest students go about finding what works for them? Because if they've, I suppose, dedicated a lot of time to putting together a revision folder and then they figure out it doesn't work for them, that could be a lot of time and effort lost. So is there any shortcuts, I suppose, to that, or is the only way to, I suppose, do all of them or test a few things?
I think the revision folder is compulsory. Everyone's going to need a revision folder. But I think what it is what goes into that folder. Does that? Yeah, and I think that's where the student's got to make the decision. And I think the way what I would ask the student to do is if they're distance learning or they're doing a course online, there will be various questions that will be set afterwards, or there are various question banks. And I think what the student then needs to do is perhaps try and experiment using the study manual to quickly get me the answer, or is the memory jogger equally effective, or are they finding actually I want to do some kind of revision, their own revision notes that combine the both, where they've got everything on a single page. Okay, which is what I've done. Mm-hmm. I've not copied the study manual or memory joggers, but I've done it in my way that would help me, like prompts. So I prefer lots of prompts. Okay, so that I can. The less you have in your revision folder in terms of text, the more quicker you'll be in the exam, because it's about applying your knowledge. And the best example is penalties, admin. Try admin. Try using the memory joggers for admin. They're fantastic. Yeah. Okay. So for certain things, Jack, they won't need manuals. They won't need to create revision notes because the memory joggers are just amazing. But for other things, students may feel, actually, I need a bit more detail here. So it comes down to them trying things out.
Yeah. And that makes sense, really. It's the only way, isn't it, to do it? I know some students might be reluctant to do that, maybe because of the time input, but at the end of the day, the only person who can come to the right answer on this is going to be the student, isn't it? You can't do it for them.
No, you're right. And I genuinely found, I had, I would say, quite a few students who left it too late. They left it too late. They didn't listen to what I was in my own students. I had a handful of students who left it too late. And when it got to revision, they were in tears. They were stressed. And they hadn't stuck to the plan that we put in. And that's always going to happen because, there are work pressures, there are family pressures. We get it. I totally get it. But if you want to alleviate the stress and the anxiety, then the more you do now, okay, it's going to be easier when you start doing revision. And the key thing is to get to revision with an effective revision folder. You will be smiling. You'll be so happy. And that's what I want everyone to do. Listening to this podcast, is please get a revision folder ready so that you can try and test it over the revision phase. And you are going to get so much more out of that final bit before the real exam.
Yeah, I know I'm a little bit on the extreme end in this because I almost did one exam and then started studying for the next one almost immediately. But when should people start studying for an exam that's a May sitting, for example? Should they have already started, in your opinion, or is Feb, like, when is it, in your view?
I think Tolley's and Kaplan, we all have slightly different BPP. We slightly have different dates when our courses start. I have had a few students contact me already and said, Nick, when should I start? So good question. I say to most students is start when your course officially starts, basically. But ultimately, so all CTA, ATT students have basically February and March to get their revision folder ready. And if they do it as they go along, rather than leave it till the end, then they're in a really good place.
Yeah.
So from day one.
Makes sense. How do you want to do this then, though, for the next part, Nit? Because in the first episode we did together, there's already a lot of advice around the study stage. And just, do you want to keep this more related to revision? Do you think that'll be more useful for students?
I think we can do a little bit on study, just that we can keep it, say, Nick, just a brief summary, then we can go straight to revision.
Let's do that then. So over to you then, your brief summary on study.
Right. So for anyone studying ATT and CTA for the first time, something to bear in mind is the resources that you will have is you'll have a set of memory joggers, you'll have study manuals, and you've also then got whatever, if you're doing an online class, whatever your tutor provides you as additional material. And what I would say is understand the content, number one. Number two, work through the illustrations. Okay, the illustrations in the study manuals are amazing. Okay, they help you understand the application side of things. Once you've done that, you then want to attempt the questions in the specific question banks that will be provided to you. And that's your kind of study phase. Once you've done that, once you've completed that, you then need to decide what is going into your revision folder. Okay, so there'll be pro formas, there might be model answers you might want to put in, or prompts, as we just mentioned earlier. You need to think about, okay, if that question, that scenario came up, what will you need to help you, to give you that little nudge in the right direction in the exam? Okay, so just be very mindful. Okay, don't just put reams and reams of paper into the folder, as I've said already, and that's important. Okay, and I think that for anyone doing it for the first time, that's key. It's the more questions you can practice, okay, the more questions you can review, you can annotate, the better equipped you will be at the revision phase.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. I'm just gonna, I suppose, reiterate the point about doing the practice questions, because there is actually science behind why that's a good thing to do. Because if you've just learned something and then you test yourself immediately, one, it reinforces your understanding. Two, it means that if you did misunderstand, you can correct it straight away, so it gets that out of the way, and you'll just remember things for longer. And I know memory isn't absolutely important for the open book exam, but anything you remember is obviously going to be a bonus. So definitely do that.
And also, just one last thing, if you know that there's an obscure point that you're going to forget, put it on the watch out, which is the first piece of paper in every single section. So, and that's really, you're going to forget that, then put it in.
Easy as that.
Yep.
Right then, on to the revision phase. I mean, just before we do jump into that, I suppose, just for people who are listening to this, episode 5 of the podcast did cover the study phase in detail. So you can go to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP5 and you can listen to that episode as well. I mean, it will definitely supplement this one extremely well. There will be a bit of repetition, but yeah, there's more detail around the study phase in there. So the revision phase then, so what's your advice then on how to approach this? And I suppose when do you think people should start doing the revision phase? Right,
so the revision phase will ideally start for most students towards the end of March. And at the beginning of March, the ATT and the CIOT will be running exam skills focus sessions. They're £10 for, I think for ATT, it's paper 1, paper 2 and paper 4. And then for CTA, it's the 3 advanced technical papers, OMB, individuals and TOMC. And then we've got the 2 application planning skills papers, OMB and taxation large corporates. And these are hosted by amazing tutors from BPP, Tollies and Kaplan. Okay, so as a precursor to revision, I would love every student to sign up for these. They're £10. They're online. They're for the whole day. The APS ones are for half a day, but generally for a whole day, where there are tutors showing you, helping you to get ready for revision. Okay, and they are just fantastic sessions. So that to me is step one. Is get if it's relevant to your paper, okay, then do that first. In terms of revision, if you're coming on an online course, okay, your tutors will guide you as to what they're going to be doing each day. Most of the revision courses are either 3 days or 4 days. And the revision phase, if you're self-studying for these exams, what I tell students to do is that you want to. It's a bit of a faff, but it works. I'm not a fan, and Jack, you can correct me here. I'm not a fan of just doing one question after another in a random order. That to me is pointless. What I get students to do, let's say, for example, it's ATT paper 2 or owner managed businesses. Okay, as an example, I would say, right, get every single question that covers adjustments of profit. Get every single question that covers capital allowances, trading losses for sole traders. What you then want to do is put them into your revision folder. You then read them, you annotate them, you spot the issues, you then look at the answer at the back, and you tick off what bits did you get, where did you miss out, and the bit that you got wrong, put it on the watch out. And then some questions you want to do to time, on the computer. So you're then also, it's a mix of reading, annotating, then reviewing, and also doing questions in your own time, okay, by full answers. But you should really do that towards the end when you feel comfortable with the material. And by doing that, you will spot repetition of scenarios, not questions. And you'll also learn the twists and turns that can also come up. Okay, so that makes you technically more competent, technically more aware of the potential issues that can impact that particular tax topic. That's generally my recommendation.
Yeah, I'm not really in any position to disagree with any of your suggestions here, am I?
No, you can't.
It was much more structured than the way I would have done it personally. But then again, I think given this is open book, and I suppose you are creating those watchouts and those other things to go into the revision folder, then doing it in a structured way will help, because you will know the parts that you've already, I suppose, missed out on previously, and then you almost give yourself a second chance early on to attempt it again and see if you've forgotten that point again and figure out more. So I can see how that works. I quite like to space stuff out just so I didn't clump, say, one subject really early and then have no questions left close to the exam.
I've got a plan with that. Okay, right. So the biggest complaint I get from students, okay, or why they struggle with these tax exams, is I struggle spotting the scenario. I struggle spotting the issue. That is the most difficult thing, Jack. Mm-hmm. Yeah, once student, or they get overwhelmed with the volume, especially on CTA, and a lot of students don't spend time on this skill. That the more you kind of relax and start getting used to the questions, reading them, processing that information, making notes on a piece of paper, Jack. A lot of students don't do that the first time. Mm-hmm. Okay, first, and I think the first thing is that, having a timetable. Okay, having a timetable, making sure it's in, and also I think what also helps is, Jack, I feel like if they can do that, if they can get the easier topics done first, then it builds their confidence and their technique to then tackle the more challenging topics relevant to their paper. And you're right, you're absolutely right about one thing though. that, okay, I've covered adjustments, I've covered capital allowances, but what also happens on revision, it's not just about question practice. Okay, what I tell my students is, look, once you've finished, say, adjustments and capital allowances, you need, it's what I call the revision snowball effect, is you've then got to read your watch outs and those questions that you've done. You've got to just read them every day. Yeah, so you're training the brain to still spot issues. Okay, so you're not just parking it to one side, then completely forgetting about it. The other big thing is the last 4 days before the exam. Okay, so many people will disagree with me, but if you ask any student that I have taught, they will tell you that Nit's right. The last 4 days, I know it sounds quite arrogant, but I don't mean to be.
How many email addresses do you need to give me then, Nit, to test that?
The last 4 days before the real exam, there should be no more question practice. No, none at all. Okay, it's what I call the Starbucks effect. What I want students to do is to relax, rest their hands, read their revision folder, because we talked about what goes in there, right? Watch outs, key summaries, wherever they're sourcing it from, past paper questions that they've attempted. Read it, understand it, look at the issues. And so many students have then gone into that exam ready, because they're also comfortable with the content in their folder. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
They know where things are. Whereas the students that didn't do this and went into the November exam, they were struggling to find things in their folder because they hadn't had time. They didn't give themselves time to acclimatize to their folder, and this is the thing, open book exams are really different. I've been teaching open book exams for 21 years. We know what it takes. And the one thing I tell students to do, and what you picked up on, is you should do a final revision mock 4 to 5 days before the exam. You should do a full mock to time using your folder. That dress rehearsal is critical to you passing. And Jack, I will promise you, half the students won't do it. They'll say, no, it's a waste of time. It has been proven, Jack, at BPP, okay, and I'm sure other training providers would agree, that by doing that mock beforehand, everything will go wrong. Your timings, everything will go wrong. And when we've seen, I've seen students in a final mock get 20% the week before the exam, then go on to pass it. Yeah, I've seen. And you know what? Anyone listening to this and trusting this old git of a tutor, okay, all right, you want to pass that exam, you've got to do that final mock, definitely. And because that's the only mock where you are going to be technically ready, because it's so close to the exam.
Yeah. I mean, I completely agree with the no questions for 4-ish days before, because I think I said this last time, you end up focusing on what you don't know rather than what you do know. And probably at that point you do know absolutely loads. And I wouldn't have thought about the last paper, doing a practice paper 4 to 5 days before, but I can see how helpful that would be, because most people are not going to, I suppose, be fully prepared up until around that point. So doing it any earlier, that's going to be a waste of time. Probably doing it any later is going to make people worry too much. So it seems like a nice balance.
Can I let you into a little secret?
Go for it.
No, I need to share this. So when I started at BPP about 15 years ago, we had a client whom we were doing this revision for. And the way it was structured was that the revision was done a week before the exam, CTA, and BPP put in place a final mock on the Thursday. The exam's on the Tuesday and the final mock's on the Thursday. And I was like, are you serious? You want these guys? And, I was completely against this. Okay, I thought I genuinely thought it was a complete waste of time. I'm not going to lie, I can be very honest with people. Okay, all the students failed the mock. Every student failed the mock. But when it came to the real exam, Jack, 100% pass rate.
Incredible.
Yeah, and credit to them, because and my boss, who was amazing, said, Nick, just trust me, they need to do this. Okay, and ever since then, I've been sold on it. It is, it works. the final, it does work. So yeah, it wasn't once. For 4 years on the trot, we were getting 100% pass rate for this particular client, and call it fluke, luck, whatever, all the credit down to the students. But I do feel that final mock had a lot to do with it.
Yeah, it's clearly had an impact. And I mean, for people out there who are stubborn like me and think they know better, then in this case, put that out the window and take on board the advice, and I'm sure you won't regret it.
Yeah.
Okay, then. So just on the revision folder then. So I think there probably is, maybe it's the name of it that I think comes across as confusing to some students, because it's not a folder to revise from as such, is it? I think from what we talked about already, it's a folder to use in the exam to prompt you and to give you quick access to that information. So really, all students need to do is figure out what information they need for the exam. Think of a structured way to organise that so that they can quickly access it, and then practice accessing it quickly so they can use it on the day. I think that's pretty much everything they need to do, isn't it? Unless I've missed something.
Yeah. So if any student out there thinking, I really don't like this name, revision folder, okay, so you can call it your tax exam comfort blanket. It's something that's going to help you on the day answer the questions. Yeah, that's what this is, and I've always called it a revision folder. But yeah, it is. You're going to need some sort of folder, okay, to help you. And I genuinely feel that these open book exams are fantastic. I think it allows students to not just memorize content, but actually apply the knowledge that they're going to, and these are the skills that you're going to need for your daily work. So I'm a big fan of open book. I'm praying that it carries on forever, okay, once this pandemic is over. And I think if and a lot of students will be terrified of CTA JAT. There'll be people retaking who didn't quite make the cut with the November exams, and I will say, look, don't give up. It's about changing attitudes. It's about changing technique. These exams are passable. They're definitely possible, but you've got to put in the work. You have to put in the work. And Jack, the problem is a lot of students don't put in the work, or they put in the hours, but it's not effective. It's not efficient. And I'm saying to anyone listening to this, look, talk to your tutors. They're all amazing at BPP, Tollies and Kaplan. Okay. We're just one tax family as tutors. You can direct message me. I'm happy to give you guidance. Okay, on non-technical matters if you're not a BPP student. Okay, and you will get through this, but small steps, bite-sized chunks. Okay, and by the time you get to March, you are going to be on top form. So yeah.
Good, and you just reminded me, I suppose, there. So people who have failed one of the exams already, have you got any specific advice for those coming into, I suppose, a resit? Is there anything you recommend they do?
Yeah, so someone who fails the exam, they'll always say to me, I finished every question in the question bank. That was never going to guarantee your pass in the first place. Okay, so you've got to get that out of your mindset. I think a lot of students need to be quite honest with themselves as to what genuinely went wrong. And I think, Jack, that's phase one. You need to acknowledge that it could be that you overwrote, your reading the question technique wasn't great, your revision folder wasn't the way you wanted it to be. You weren't time efficient in the exam. So there are lots of factors. And I think step one is being very honest, and then communicating that with your tutor so that we can then help you. So if one of my students fails, okay, I'll say, okay, tell me what it is. Then we can work on that. We can put a plan in place, so definitely there's a lot of support available for them. But just don't give up, and sometimes I think sometimes some students take on too much, Jack. They're doing more than one exam. There are family pressures. And I will always ask students, I know it sounds horrible, when I'm speaking to a student, I will always say, are you married? Do you have children? Is your job time, pressured? Because all of these things also have an impact on how much time you can contribute. Yeah. And so sometimes some students are better off deferring as well, Jack, and then picking up their exams when they've got the headspace, the time, and everything else to do it properly. So it's not one glove fits all approach for a resitter. I like to take it on a case by case basis. so that you can help that student achieve their potential. But those are the usual suspects why things go wrong.
Yeah. Well, that first step is obviously the most important, isn't it? Is honestly identifying what the problem actually was. I know it's a hard thing to do, especially self-reflection, but if you can identify that by the sounds of it, you can then obviously figure out what to do about it to give yourself a better chance of passing this time around.
Totally.
Right. Last time I think I gave the impression that I was a massive advocate of using the legislation because it's so useful on the job, and I use it a lot in the exams, and I still am a big advocate of using the legislation. I imagine people will use it less in these exams since they're open book, and they will be relying more on, say, a revision folder instead. But where do you stand on use of legislation in these open book exams? Should students still use them, or do you think they should shy away from it and just stick to the revision folders?
Okay, good. As always, a really good question, Jack. Okay, right. The legislation, I would say, in my opinion, I think I feel this time round that students don't need to read the legislation so much because it is in their memory joggers and study materials. They need to apply it more so. Because it's all available. So again, for admin, what some students are doing what they did last year, they photocopied some sections of the legislation and put it in their revision folder or tax comfort blanket. Okay, and then use that to help apply. So I think it all comes down to the students. What I've done with my students, so it all comes down to the tutor. Sorry, what I've done with my students for taxation and major corporates. Say for demergers, it historically was very, very legislation heavy. So in a closed book exam, Jack, I would say to students, look, don't learn all of this. Everything's in the legislation. Let's highlight it together, okay? And then let's try and apply it to a scenario. We don't need to do that anymore. I've actually summarized the legislation for them and said, here it is, go and apply it. So I think to that extent, I think that students should be using the legislation less. And if there are sections that they want to use, like capital ounces, there are some really amazing schedules in the capital ounces ledge. Then photocopy it, put it into your revision folder. It works equally as well. So the student needs to be comfortable with whatever approach works for them. But I've definitely said to my students, we will be using it less.
Yeah. Good tips as always there. I mean, maybe for people who don't have a photocopier, because I don't, for example, so maybe people could just write down the section number of the legislation and stick that in the revision folder as one of the bullet points. Maybe that could work as a substitute.
What they can do, I mean, for this exam, what they can do is they can highlight the legislation, Jack. And sorry, my apologies, I didn't really appreciate it, didn't even think of that, about not having a photocopier. This is what happens when you take it for granted when you have a home office. But in that situation, what I would then say is highlight the ledge as normal, okay, and tab it. Just put a post-it note there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because it's an open book resource. You for 2021, you can historically you were not allowed to mark on your tabs or all sorts, but given it's an open book resource, you can do that this year, which makes using the legislation a lot more quicker, a lot more effective for those that don't have access to a photocopier.
I have just thought of something though, actually, and this could be maybe stupid, but obviously there's a potential for the November 2021 sittings to not be open book anymore. So I imagine people might have to be careful with the legislation so that they don't write on it and make it unusable in 2021. Or otherwise,
I will be surprised. I might be shocked by the CIOT for saying this. I'll be shocked if it wasn't open book. I think. I would say, don't write in your ledge just in case by a miracle this pandemic is over and we're back into exam halls again. Then don't. But just you can put on you can write on the post-it note and put that in, so you can then remove the post-it note carefully.
Yeah, otherwise you can invoice Nitin for the cost of your new ledge.
Jack and I will go hard.
So I suppose two last points just to wrap this up then. Sure. You gave some really good tips around this last time. So on the day before the exam, what do you suggest that people do to get in the mindset and get ready to sit it?
Yeah, because most of us will be doing the exams at home, or so I think what's really important, my personal opinion is, and this is something we didn't really talk about much last year, but I think one of the things I said to students for the November exam is think about your environment. Think about where you're sitting the exam in your house, flat, property. Okay, think about the lighting. And funny enough, a lot of my students actually started clearing their rooms. Actually started cleaning their room. No, seriously, because I'm very OCD. I need clean surfaces, clear lines, and I can't be doing with clutter. And it was interesting how many students actually said, Nick, you're right. I can't do an exam, a high-level tax exam with the mess in my house. So a lot of people started doing this clear out. So, and I think that, I also think when you're practicing questions, your course exams, your mock exams, get used to the room that you're going to do it. And I actually had one student switch from the bedroom to the kitchen because there was more natural light. I had another student that said to me, Nick, I've got a bus stopping every 15 minutes outside my house. Well, can I have headphones? You can do whatever you want. Have some music. For some students, I even suggested, some spa music. Seriously, yeah, just because there was background noise, in the flats or whatever. So you can create this ambience that works for you. Okay, making sure your chair is comfortable, everything's ready, and so I think that's really important. Having the workspace to put your folders, and so I think that's one thing. I think for first and foremost, I think getting the room ready is a big thing. And I also think in the morning, a lot of students say, Nick, what should I be doing in the morning? And I would say at the very least, okay, at the very, very least, read your watch outs again. Yeah, read your watch outs again, have a sensible breakfast. Okay, everyone knows their specific dietary requirements and how their bowel movements work. Okay, and so yeah, have a sensible breakfast, stay hydrated. And I think it's about, if you've done the work, you've done the scenarios, you've done everything we've asked you to do, you will pass that exam, and so I think that's really, really important is having that good mental state, and just being relaxed. And I can assure you, Jack, the number of students I spoke to just days before the exam where they were just breaking down in tears, and what it was, being at home and all the other pressures, just talk to a friend, talk to a friend, just have good vibes, positive people around you. Yeah. And, and have someone just that person, just get a little support. And if it is a code red, you can direct message me on LinkedIn. I've done it before for non-BPP students and I'll keep doing it. Okay. So if you need that support, just a little bit of a nudge, it's there. So you're not alone. You're genuinely not alone. And I think in the exam itself, you need to already have had a game plan as to what you're going to do. Okay, so for ATT, and there'll be, and again, this is my personal opinion, you don't have to do this. For ATT, I usually tell students to do the long form questions first. Okay, and then allow X amount of time to then do the short form questions later. Because if you do the more difficult questions first, the longer questions first, then as you approach the 2 hours and 15-minute mark, the short form questions just take the pressure off. Yeah, so mentally it can help you. So that works a lot. With the advanced technical papers, okay, I recommend all students to do the written questions first. Okay, because written questions tend to be easier if you know the content, and then the computational questions, okay, you can leave to the end because you can put numbers down a lot quicker than you can sentences. So and I did have that again in November where students ran over. I'm really strict on this. I have no sympathy for students runs over time. Okay, but and my students know they will get a telling off if they run, because we talk about this every day from the talk phase to the final session before the exam. Okay, you're not always going to finish the question. I use this 50% approach. Yeah, and I'm a big fan of it, and students love it. If there's a 10-mark question, remember, 10-mark question, you need 5 to pass. I'm not saying you stop at 5, but you've got to find 5 marks first. Then you're on a win. Okay, and that's what this is about. Okay, it's about each question half the marks. You've got double the time to get half the marks. Okay, short sentences. Okay, when you're typing, a lot of students like to write. I said this last time. It's my running joke. It's the next. Don't write the next 50 Shades of Tax. Okay, in the exam. And it's all the things. It's Jack. Every year that I've been teaching this, all the students a handful of students still keep making the same mistakes, no matter how many times we say it. Okay, and I think I think, like I said, about change of approach, change of attitude, focus. And you'll be absolutely fine. And just make sure all your equipment is working. IT equipment's working, and it's all good. And I think that's important.
Yeah, all really good points there, as always. I'm just going to mention again, because you did mention it earlier in the episode, but the ATT CAOT exam skill sessions that they do, £10 is an absolute steal for those. They used to be £100, I think, from what you were telling me earlier, weren't they, Nick?
£90 to £100, yeah.
So for £10 to have that full day of having experienced tutors to help you through these exams, I think it's an absolute steal. So I can highly recommend you take a look at that. I mean, so I can highly recommend that people do that.
And these are amazing tutors from Tolly's, Kaplan, BPP, who are giving up a day to help students, and it's all online. If you can't make the session, you'll get sent the recordings. But it's your opportunity to then ask that tutor a question. I'm doing the ATT paper 2 day. I'm doing the taxation of major corporates and taxation of large corporates papers. And then one of my best friends, I have to mention him, Sheridan Gray, who's now at Tolly's. Okay, he's doing ATT paper 4. So you've got amazing tutors that, really wanting to help you. So if you can sign up, that'll be amazing. The dates are not released yet. Okay, I know we've done the pitch. Watch this space. I'll be posting it on LinkedIn. The ATT and the CIOT will be emailing you the dates as well. So watch out for the email as well. And so we will be promoting it to try and get as many people to join in.
Perfect. So you've already mentioned about LinkedIn there. So people can obviously connect with you on LinkedIn, can't they? If they want to see your... And is there anywhere else that you think they need to know about? I think the CIOT have a page, don't they, and ATT for studying students, don't they? That's got a bunch of useful resources on.
Absolutely. So whatever I post on LinkedIn is also on the landing page. And, and Jack, I'm going to be honest, look, this isn't about BPP today. This is about us helping students, and Kaplan and Tolly's also put amazing content on there as well. And they've been equally fantastic over this pandemic in supporting students. And I think credit really needs to go out to them as well, in all fairness. So there's a lot of resource for ATT and CTA students, and just use it. And we really hope you enjoy it.
Yeah. So I'll have links anyway in the show notes of this episode to Nitin's LinkedIn profile, and also any other links that we think are useful as well. All right. Well, that's everything for today then. So thank you very much for coming on again, Nit. I'm sure everyone will find this extremely useful, like they did last time. So yeah, just thank you.
Brilliant. And thank you to you as well, Jack, for doing this. Honestly, I know the last one that we did together, had some amazing feedback. And so I am truly, truly grateful to you for taking time out and allowing me to speak. So yeah, thank you so much.
Great tips as always from Nitin there. If you take on board the tips from this and episode 5 of the podcast, you'll be giving yourself the best chances possible of passing the May 2021 exams. If you do have any questions, please feel free to get in contact with me or Nitin. Details for both of us can be found in the show notes. The show notes can be found at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP19. The show notes include a link to everything mentioned in this episode, including the step-by-step guide to creating your very own revision folder, and episode 5 of the podcast, which is the last episode which Nitin joined me on. That's it for this episode. I hope you found the episode useful and have taken away some useful points to help you progress and develop your tax career. Until next time.